Welcome to the Explainer. All right, let's dive right in. We're looking at the massive ripple effect of one single economic decision, the US hitting India with some steep new tariffs. Now, this isn't just a story about two countries. This is an event that's sending waves across the entire global economy. So let's trace those ripples.
You know, it's amazing how it works. One country makes a move, and suddenly the whole world is holding its breath, asking the very same question. What happens now?
So here's the spark that lit the fuse. The US government announced these steep new tariffs, which are essentially just taxes on goods coming into the country, and they aimed them right at India, a major trading partner. This was the stone dropped in the pond.
Okay, so let's start with part one, the tariff spark.
And the very first ripple to spread out from that decision, well, it was this powerful, almost instantaneous chorus of condemnation from all over the world.
And just look who started pushing back. This is what's so fascinating. We're not just talking about the usual rivals here. No, we're talking about major economic partners and traditional US allies. You've got the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and even key nations like Brazil and others in the global south voicing some really serious concerns.
And the language they used, wow, it was not your typical diplomatic speak. Japan's official statement called the move extremely regrettable, but here's the crucial part. They didn't just complain. They immediately framed their argument around international law, pointing to the rules of the World Trade Organization, the WTO, which is supposed to be the world's trade referee.
And Japan was definitely not alone here. The EU came out swinging, warning of a serious blow not just to their relationship, but to the entire global economy. At the same time, South Korea was scrambling to convene an emergency panel just to figure out how to respond. So you see, these aren't just complaints. These are the actions of allies getting ready for some major economic turbulence.
But hey, while the allies were scrambling and voicing their concerns, other global powers were watching all of this, and they were seeing, well, an opportunity. And that brings us to the really fascinating strategic power plays from Russia and China.
And it's so interesting to compare their reactions because they took totally different approaches. Russia, on one hand, played it by the book, defending India's sovereign right to pick its own partners and calling the whole thing illegitimate. China, though, they were much more confrontational. They came right out and called the tariffs bullying and immediately started dropping hints about stepping in to form a new economic team-up with India.
You can just feel the tension in the language coming out of Beijing. A Chinese envoy used this pretty thinly veiled warning. Give the bully an inch, and he will... You don't have to read too far between the lines on that one. The message is crystal clear. China sees this as aggression, and it's getting ready to position itself as a counterweight.
So with the rest of the world reacting in all these different ways, what about the country that's right at the center of the storm? Let's turn our focus to India and how it's trying to navigate its way through these incredibly turbulent waters.
India's response seems to be a really calculated three-pronged strategy. First up, diplomacy. They're using channels like the BRICS group of nations to find a peaceful solution. Step two, though, they're keeping the threat of retaliation on the table. You could think of it as leverage. And then there's the third part, which might be the most important in the long run. A pivot towards self-reliance. That means boosting their own internal market and finding new countries to export to. And inside India itself, some really influential voices are trying to frame this threat as a catalyst for something positive. The prominent industry leader Anand Mahendra argued that this crisis should be seen as an opportunity for landmark economic reform. I mean, that's a powerful idea, right? Using this external pressure to drive some real, meaningful internal change. Okay, so we've seen this spark. We've seen the global reactions. But what does it all add up to? Are we just watching a temporary spat? Or could the entire global trade map be getting redrawn right before our eyes? When you lay it all out like this, one thing becomes incredibly clear. There's no single, unified response. Every player on this board is acting in their own self-interest. You have allies trying to preserve the system we've known, you have rivals looking to exploit the disruption, and then you have India, caught right in the middle, basically being forced to hedge its bets and prepare for anything.
And that leaves us with the big question that, honestly, everyone from Wall Street to Washington is asking right now.
Is this just a temporary dispute that'll eventually get smoothed over with negotiations, or are these tariffs the first tremor of a much larger earthquake? The very beginning of a new global alignment with new economic blocks and shifting loyalties? That's the question everyone is grappling with. Thanks for joining this explainer.